Welcome to Arrested DevOps, Episode 11, DevOps at Etsy, not a unicorn, just a sparkly horse. I'm your co-host, Matt Stratton. I'm at Matt Stratton on Twitter.
And I'm your co-host, Trevor Hess, at Trevor G. Hess on Twitter.
Arrested DevOps is brought to you by 10th Magnitude, a cloud services company that believes DevOps makes their clients more awesome. You can check out their 360-degree cloud services at 10thmagnitude.com.
So tonight on 10th Magnitude, we're going to...
Trevor?
Yeah?
The name of the podcast is Arrested DevOps.
What did I say?
10th Magnitude.
Oh. We can never get our name right. Tonight on Arrested DevOps, we're going to go take a flash to the past.
Wait.
So, I don't know if anybody who's listened to our first episode, but you might remember Matt saying something like this.
People who know better than we do, but we're going to really try to steer clear of name dropping. So you're not going to hear me say, when I was talking to John Alspaugh at Velocity, yeah, but you're also not going to.
Matt, do you remember saying that?
It's possible.
Well, it just so happens we're talking to the ops team at Etsy today, whom John Alspaugh is a member of. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But before we get started with that, I just got some personal news. I'm actually going to be joining, or have already joined, the 10th Magnitude team. So I'm going to be working in the cloud with DevOps and with Matt, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've got some news too. So I swear this is not because Trevor is joining 10th Magnitude, but I am actually leaving 10th Magnitude, and I will be joining Chef as a solution architect in a couple weeks. So sad to leave 10th Magnitude, but leaving him in capable hands with Trevor, and real excited to go join Chef. So enough about us. This episode is sponsored by PagerDuty. PagerDuty helps businesses increase their reliability by connecting people to their global operations with actionable intelligence. PagerDuty makes it easy for engineering teams to manage the entire lifecycle of their instance in order to decrease things like resolution time and improve quality of life for everybody who's on call, which is someone who's been on call before, I dig. PagerDuty is trusted by Nike, GitHub, thousands of other companies, including Etsy. And PagerDuty helps keep the systems you're using every day online by making sure the right people know at the right time about issues so they're resolved quickly and before they become major customer impacting failures. You can check them out at pagerduty.com. And it's time now to geek all over the Etsy awesome. To quote Bridget Crumhout on Twitter, she says she likes to level up her game by learning from Etsy. We were going to make that our title, but John Cowie from Etsy said that was far too unicorn-ish. So we went with sparkly horses, and let's get started. First on our panel, we have John Cowie. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is John Cowie. I'm a senior ops engineer on the team at Etsy, and I resolutely maintain we are not a unicorn. We have the same problems as everybody else does, but what we're going to try and, I guess, talk a bit about today is how we deal with them and how we do some of the engineering stuff we do. So I'm kind of, I guess, my primary jam is chef stuff. I've written a lot about chef tooling at Etsy, and I'm working on a chef book for O'Reilly at the moment, which will hopefully be coming out soon.
And my name is John Alspaugh, and I manage the infrastructure and operations organizations at Etsy, which is roughly about half of the engineering org at Etsy.
And my name is Pete Belisano. I'm a web operations engineer and newest member of the team.
And I'm David Yerkowitz, web operations engineer. Been roughly here for a year, and yeah, loving every moment here.
So for our listeners who don't know, Etsy really does enjoy a reputation in the industry for being a shop that quote-unquote gets DevOps, if not really setting the standard. So I'd like to know, guys, why do you think you guys enjoy that reputation?
So to kind of answer that, this is tailing on from the discussion we had on Twitter the other week about when somebody mentioned Etsy was a unicorn. There's kind of a bit of a there are a couple of companies in which I think Etsy is one who tends to be considered unicorns in the industry. But what I was saying on Twitter, what I believe is that I think calling Etsy a unicorn is a bit of a misnomer, because that implies that we, somehow have magical powers that other people don't. And really, I think if I guess the secret to the way Etsy does operations is not that we have magical powers that people don't, or we have this these innate abilities that no one else has. We have all the same problems as every other company out there does. We have servers that break, we have software with bugs, we get paged in the middle of the night. I think if I could put my finger on it and say anything that lets Etsy do what we do, is that we have, from the CEO down, IT and engineering is recognized as a core competency of the company. And we've put the resources and practices in place to make sure that, basically we've solved quite a lot of the easy problems. So that the combination of those lets us be more proactive than reactive. So we're spending less time firefighting and more time, doing things, like we get to speak on podcasts, and we have time to contribute to open source software because we aren't spending quite so much time fighting fires because we've put in the work and the resources and the headcount to make sure that we have the space to do, proactive stuff as well.
So, what would you guys say would be like the short version, the Spark Notes of DevOps at Etsy?
Well, I would just say pretty much like, each company kind of does it differently. I think one of the greatest things here is that how is level between like, different teams and between operation, and we have like all developers, and it's how seamless we interact with each other. The fact that if someone's working on something, there's really no barriers between, collaborating between each team. I think that's probably like the biggest thing that that we can probably say is like the seamless interaction that happens, and it's how it kind of works together real nicely. Like we have people like we have specifically to our search stack, or even in our own, like we have in dev tools, and we have different teams, and like if we have a meeting for a new feature that's coming, we have that collaboration. It kind of naturally, organically happens, and I think that's what actually just makes it, work so well.
I think an even shorter version is I had this discussion. I think it was with Matt at ChefCon. We trust our colleagues and we communicate with them. I think those two things pretty much underpin the entire thing.
Yeah.
So, Alspa, knowing that you've been around since quite some time over there, and for people who are new to DevOps may not realize why I'm geeked out to have you on. But what's been the history of DevOps at Etsy? So we see where you guys have gotten, but kind of what did you see as were some of the transformative things that you had to do, or that were not necessary to make it be successful?
It's a good question, and I think that the answer would be that there wasn't a single concerted effort. It's not like we when I first got to Etsy, there was a bunch of the infrastructure, basically somewhat of a reinvention of engineering as a discipline as a whole, but it's not like we had to do some campaigning. It's not like, well, there's this thing called DevOps, and let's have some lunch and learns about DevOps. It wasn't, there wasn't a lot of marketing that needed to happen. In fact, it still is very, very weird to hear the word DevOps. If somebody says DevOps in the office, it feels very weird. You're probably referencing something that someone said on the internet, and you wouldn't hear it in colloquial, in regular conversation. It just feels weird to say. So I wouldn't say that I can't boil down to like a pithy, well, here are the 3, or 5 or 10 or 100 steps that we went. What we went with. I think what it meant was that decision making needed to recognize domain expertise and finding sort of shared mutual understanding of various problems that we needed to solve, but in that high trust way that Cowie pointed out. I realize I'm being vague, but outside of specifics, there wasn't much other than that, and don't be an asshole, really. That was put in place. How's that for an answer?
I think that's great. And I think the thing that resonates with me was, I podcast title aside and my license plates aside, I love the fact that you guys don't use that term. Like you said, it's weird, right? It's just sort of business as usual. And
right.
If other people have put that name on it, awesome, but whatever, this is just how we work. And
it really helps to underpin as the concept is, a series of concepts and best practices, so much as a quantitative thing that, there's the same reason everybody gets who really believes in the concept and the best practices gets angry when people says we need more DevOps. We need more, we want to buy DevOps.
Yeah, it's like it's a buzzword. It's like in our industry we have a lot of buzzwords that kind of like come in and like either they'll turn into like these marketing terms, and like it's sadly that the whole movement has turned into like, oh well, hey, we're marketing and we're giving you DevOps. You can have DevOps this way. So that's why I kind of agree with John. It's kind of a joke, and like if you say, oh well, let's no one says, hey, let's do DevOps today. Like that's just kind of
there's something about that the word is underspecified. That's all. It's that it's no different than it's no different than cloud. It's no different than but it's no different than there's no different than compliance. It's no different than scalability. It's no different than resilience. You just I think that part and parcel of getting good engineering work done is paying attention to language. And engineering as a whole generally has a low tolerance for things that are either underspecified or don't have enough specification to be useful in conversation. So you wouldn't say, oh well, we need more. Let's take a look at this architecture. Okay, well, we need to store information in a database, and we need to maybe cache it, and then we need to, retrieve it. Okay. Well, you never say somebody would never say, oh, well, I think what we need here is more robustness. So let's just add some more robustness to it, right? That would be the start of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. And Absolutely. So. And like the second question after that is, okay, what do you mean by it? Agreed, it needs to be more robust. Now let's talk about what that means, because we need to sort of unpack it, and that's the reason why it's just sort of a waste of time to say DevOps, because if the real thing that you want to get at is, hey, this revelation of something new, or a departure in the way we wrote an alert, or something along those lines, you would just say, oh hey, here are the reasons why this is surprising to me. I saw this design document, or I saw this metric and it went a little weird and that was surprising to me. You wouldn't say there's not enough DevOps in this graph, or along those lines. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I like the idea that we can use a common term as a starting point of the conversation, and I think that, and I also really agree, David, with your point about how it's like we have these buzzwords and they've been latched onto from a marketing perspective, and to me it's a blessing and a curse. I mean, the good thing is it's getting the idea out there, so it gives us a shortcut to start a conversation. But then, like John, like you said, when it becomes the end of the conversation, then you haven't accomplished anything. So I really do struggle with the word in that way. But I think once you're doing work, then it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah. And it only becomes problematic if you end up being satisfied with leaving it there, right? It's no different than the terms human error or situation awareness or complacency. These are all just they're fine words. They're just underspecified. That's all.
So we were talking before we started the show about the kind of wide spectrum of Etsy engineering that we have in the virtual room, and my understanding is that Pete, you're certainly not new to technology, but kind of this is a different type of a role for you, and I'd love to have a little bit of background, like where you came from, at least philosophically, and what you're seeing is different being at Etsy.
Absolutely. Actually, about 10 years ago, I was in IT. I actually worked with some of the guys that are here now. And I left to start my own business, totally outside of technology. I did that for about 7 years, and I actually became a fan of Etsy during that time, not aware of the fact that I still had, my friends that were working here, guys I used to work with. And I missed the technology, so I got tired of being my own boss, and I actually joined the team of Corp IT in February of 2013, and did that for about a year, and I just joined the ops team in January. So the transition's been amazing. One of the things I guess John and David were touching on, and John Allspaw too, sorry, there's two Johns, was that the thing that made it possible was the culture that we have. And from my perspective, that's the reason why I'm here. Both from seeing it outside and also being a part of it internally. The culture is very nurturing. There's a lot of collaboration, and there's really no limits to what you can do if you have the drive and the want to ask a lot of questions, because everybody's more than accessible. So.
Cool. And then David, I understand you're relatively new to Etsy, but you've been in this web ops world for quite some time. So any thoughts that you have about things that you're seeing that are really done differently where you're at now that strike you?
Yeah, I mean, sure, definitely. I mean, I've been doing like IT, regular system administration, for quite a while, and it's one thing that I find interesting here is that like what Pete touched on is culture, and you can't really buy culture. You can't really like just kind of get a consultant to come in and like, hey, we're gonna change how we do things, and we're gonna do either DevOps or whatever you want to call it. Here it's actually the culture actually enables the openness to have people to learn a lot and touch new technologies, and actually, like I said earlier, like one thing that I love about this place is the natural way that we kind of like solve problems together. We don't have to be in the same team, but like how cross teams they work together, and like I said, it's organically, it just happens, and it's very natural, and like what Allspaw said, it's like pretty much like everyone's it's pretty much don't be an asshole. Like we're solving things together, and we kind of like who we work with, so it works really well. And in other places that I worked, we were working with similar technology, but there were a lot of limitations. There was a separation between like the system administrators and the operational people and the developers and DBAs and stuff like that. So that segregation like hinder the culture, hinder a lot of the projects, a lot of the things. If there were new ideas where you needed to take a DBA or a certain developer for something else, like it would hinder that here. If you have an idea, I can go to a DBA, hey, what do you think about that? And then, hey, I need help with front end stuff. I can talk to people in front end and so forth. So it's that the natural like collaboration that happens here because of the culture. It's what makes it pretty awesome here.
So if I'm understanding what you're describing of the culture, you guys have a very like open workspace. You don't separate, developers from ops, from IT. Everybody kind of works in the same space, I'm guessing. Or could you put some more definition around
I
what
mean,
you mean by
There's a lot of
culture?
cross-pollination.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of that. I mean, as far as like, we have teams, of course, specifically under the operation and infrastructure umbrella. We have specific teams for like I said earlier, dev tools. We kind of deal with tooling internally, core, and some that work with the search infrastructure and performance and stuff like that. So we have those teams kind of separated, but as far as like it's open space. Like for example, in our office, I sit with pretty much with all the people in operations, but I have corp IT sitting like next to us. John sits like not too far from us, so it's like a very open space. So if I have a question, I can just get up and like, hey John, what do you think about this graph? Or like John might come, hey, I like that graph. Can you tell me what's going on here? So it's the open is very open, like as far as the office. So it kind of enables that cross working experience, I'd say.
But then on the flip side, I mean, so I actually live in the UK, so we have a lot of remote employees as well. I think one of the most powerful, the most powerful thing about Etsy's culture is that what David was just describing there about the office culture, cross pollination between teams and stuff. That doesn't, I mean, it is an open plan office, but I don't think the communication is a result of the layout of the furniture in the office. So like the same cross pollination happens with me as a remote employee. I mean, I work 5 hours behind and several thousand miles away from most of the people I interact with on a day-to-day basis, but there's still the same, albeit on video chat or IRC or email, there's still the same cross pollination of ideas and kind of intermingling of ideas within teams and all that sort of stuff. Within remote teams as well as sort of in the same geographic location.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much everything kind of happens like in IRC. That's another great thing, though. Like we'll have these channels where a lot of someone can come in and.
For you. Oh.
I'm sorry?
I think you guys, at least for me, you guys cut out, so I'm not sure if anybody
Oh,
else.
I'm sorry about that. Pretty much what I was saying, with pretty much all the communication, most of it happens in IRC. So we have all these channels where all the general communication happens, and like I could be talking to someone that's right here in the Brooklyn office, or someone that's like in the West Coast, or like someone like John that's in London, and it's very seamless. It works really well, and I think that actually helps.
Do you see with people coming on, and I would, so you talk about the culture. The culture's awesome, and again, I mean, I think we've could probably agree that the culture's the hard part, right? The tools are easy. But do you, when folks come in to start working at Etsy, do you sometimes see them get kind of a culture shock if they've come from a place that doesn't have this level of trust? I mean, I think about, I've been doing sysadmin for a long time, and I always would make the joke that like your best sysadmins are super cynical because their job is to assume that everything's going to break, and that sometimes corresponds into that they don't trust people because, and I don't know, I think about like a lot of the sysadmins I've worked with and could see them coming to Etsy and be waiting for the other shoe to drop the whole time, being like, what's the catch? This sounds too good, or developers coming in and having a different approach. Do you see that happen?
I might grab this one because I've actually been in exactly the position you're describing. So my background before Etsy, I've been at Etsy about 2.5 years now. Before Etsy, I always worked at very, very small startups where I was the only ops person, the only sysadmin. And I developed a very, I guess you would call it a very sort of BOFH attitude. Like I am the sole, the infrastructure is mine, I'm solely responsible for it, nobody else can touch it or they'll break it. So for me, when I joined Etsy, it wasn't quite a culture shock, it was more of I had to adjust the way I was thinking, because whereas in the companies I was used to working for, if a server went down, I would have someone screaming at me on the end of the phone. Mm-hmm. I would say one of the biggest adjustments I had to make coming to work at Etsy was this idea that largely thanks to people like Allspaw and Micro and Betsy, who was my direct boss at the time, promoting this idea that like essentially shit happens. Like, things are going to break. With all the will in the world, you cannot defeat human error. So rather than yelling at people for when the inevitable happens and something goes wrong, let's try and figure out, how to learn from that. And, okay, a mistake happened. What were the assumptions that led you to do what you did? How can we avoid that next time? Can we improve our monitoring? So I think for me, it was this thing I was saying before of trusting your colleagues and communicating with them, particularly on the trust side, given I was used to being the guy who got yelled at. I'd say the biggest adjustment was, it was a nice adjustment to have to make, just this idea that all of a sudden I'm not the only person interested in keeping the systems running. Like, developers own their availability too, and there's developers on call I can wake up if something goes wrong with the code that I can't fix. And there was definitely an adjustment to make, but I would say it was definitely on the good side.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to say, yeah, and it's great to hear like all of these other guys, including exactly what Cowie just said, because it helps validate. It helps validate my own sort of thinking, at least my hopes when I first got here. Inherent in your question, you had mentioned, okay, so the culture's awesome, and the question was around whether or not there's culture shock when people come in. Is the culture awesome? I think the question has a premise that there is something to be discerned, and I think that there's probably a fallacy in there, that the culture is somehow. I'm not going to dismiss the idea that an organization has inertia and momentum, but that's on behaviors, not on culture. And I think one of the things that we do well is not that we just we indoctrinate people, like we scare the assholeness out of people, I think that instead we turn our focus from, instead of preventing a bad culture, it's by making misunderstandings and easily repairable. Faulty information and misunderstandings, if you can't detect when they're happening and repair them quickly, that's what allows the practices to sort of drift from where you expect them to be. And bad cultures happen when practices and behaviors drift from where you expect them to be. We're here in New York. Us three are here in New York. And if you were to ask a New Yorker if they think that people in New York are terrible drivers, they're not going to say yes. They're going to say they're just drivers. Whereas if you ask the same person who comes from Kansas City to drive in Manhattan, or at least be in the back of a cab in Manhattan, they're going to say those people are fucking crazy. And so there's a normalization that happens, and it's not just a normalization of don't be an asshole, because that sounds like more of a preventative measure. Instead, if we just eschew the idea that we're going to set it and forget it, and we make it incredibly easy for people to be like, hey, you said that thing in IRC. I think it sounds like you're really frustrated because you had a really shitty day. That's totally happens to me. I want you to know that you're kind of being a dick. Mm-hmm. And the other person hearing that can say, oh, that sucks. Sorry about that. Thanks for telling me. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. There's no like special chip that we can stick in the back of somebody's neck that says that you're going to be, that you're going to be a nice person and be, Buddha-like in your, abilities to sort of bring your best self every day.
Should we tell the NFS over WAN story as a good example of this?
Oh yeah, I completely jumped down Cowie's throat. This is at least maybe about a year ago. He made a suggestion. He made a suggestion in full enthusiasm. He was wanting to help solve a problem, And I think my exact words are, "That is the dumbest idea that I think that we could possibly go with." And I was on a conference call with I think even larger than the operations team. I was an absolute asshole to John Cowie. And I didn't realize it at the time. Actually, it wasn't too much longer after that. But my team made it very clear. That probably didn't come out the way you expected it to come out. And they're right. And so being able to repair those things.
As well is that you have to bear in mind, like in the organizational chart of things, Allspaw. Well, at the time, Allspaw was my boss's boss. But Allspaw is now my boss's boss's boss. So it's in some companies, Allspaw is a senior vice president. Some companies, that level of person, you can't interact with like that. You can't say to them, "Hey, you're being an asshole," or "Hey, that didn't come across the way you said it," because they'll probably fire you. So it's a pretty cool thing that we were able to say to Allspaw, like, that really didn't come across quite the way you intended it. And Allspaw was like, "You know what? You're totally right." And now we're telling a story about it. And I still work here.
Well, and you know what is an interesting thing I'm thinking about too when you said that about saying, oh, in another company, if you tell an SVP, hey, you were kind of being a jackass, he's probably going to fire you. And part of me thinks like, no, you know what, he probably isn't, but you're going to assume that if you did, he would, so you're not going to do it. And
Right.
it's that thought. Like I was in an organization once when we were trying to do a lot of this automation stuff and put some good reliable software release in place, and one of my sysadmins said, well, what happens when the CTO comes running down the hall and yelling and screaming and get this goddamn release out now, I don't give a shit. And this was always his answer, and I said that to our CTO once, and she goes, when have I ever done that? Why, but it's this underlying thing that is not necessarily based upon real examples of that, but the other stuff around it makes you think that's where it's going to go.
Right. I think the behavior and the culture are somewhat cyclical. They have to support each other.
Yeah.
Because you can have the intuition to want to be expressive of your own emotions and say, hey man, what you just said was not cool. But if you have the bigger emotion of I'm fearful for my job if I say something, because the perceived culture is that you're going to lose your job. You're back at square one.
So we talked some squishy culture stuff for a bit. I would take a little bit of a 90-degree turn and let's be nerds for a few minutes. So I would love to hear a little bit about what your infrastructure looks like. I know one of the big things that usually shocks people is that you guys are primarily bare metal, or at least the last time I heard this, that was the scoop. And that was at Chef Conf when Cowie turned to me and said, I might be interested in looking at some cloud stuff, even though it doesn't matter for Etsy because we're all bare metal. So what's it look like at the low level for you guys, for the geeks out there?
That is still the case. Our infrastructure is pretty much entirely bare metal. We do use S3 for some image storage and some backup stuff. I mean, a large amount of the reason for that is not we're averse to the cloud per se. It's that we do a lot of capacity planning. I mean, Allspaw literally wrote the book on it. We do a lot of capacity planning and things like that to plan. We understand our seasonal traffic patterns quite well. We know what our traffic does at each times of the year. We capacity plan accordingly. And honestly, we use the capacity on the physical hardware we have. Our main code base is a monolithic PHP application. We run the LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. And, for example, we understand the workload of our application. So this isn't the case if we had a physical web server, we'd only be using 5% of the CPU. And, we could just save a ton of money by virtualizing and running 10 VMs on the same box. The physical hardware we have to fill our capacity requirements, and we use it. We use it accordingly, and we actually utilize the infrastructure we have. So it's partly a case of, for us and our particular workload and our particular requirements, I don't think it doesn't make commercial sense to move it, for example, to EC2.
And what's your when you're delivering software? I mean, obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously. It's obvious to me that you guys love you some Chef, but what do you look at when you're from a software delivery practice? Are you? I mean, you said Could you speak to that a little bit? Because that's another area that we've talked about a lot on the show, and people are hearing a lot about CD and pipelines and CI and all that good stuff.
We do a lot of continuous delivery. We don't actually deploy the Etsy.com code base with Chef. We have a separate tool we developed called Deploynator, which we deploy. So essentially, Chef is everything under the application code, so the operating system and all the software that supports the application. We're big on continuous delivery. We're currently deploying somewhere in the order of 50, 60 times a day, I think. And largely the ethos is make small changes often. So if something goes wrong, we recover quickly. We have generally when new code is deployed, it will be behind a feature flag, so you can turn it off quickly or you can gradually ramp it up. Our entire kind of process and way of thinking is built around small, rapid changes. And although we don't deploy the application code base with Chef, that's kind of transferred to the way we think about Chef as well. We tend to make small, rapid Chef changes much more often than making one massive Chef change once a month. We have somewhere in the order of probably, I think the last count was somewhere around 40 people who have knife keys and can make changes to the Chef server. And we're talking, I think, a couple of hundred Chef changes a month. Less than code deploys, but we make a lot of them. And it's just the same ethos of small deploys fast and often. We have the monitoring and the metrics in place so that when something does go wrong, we can find out quickly and we can recover quickly and move on with our day, rather than it being this massive scary event when a bug is shipped to production, or we make a cookbook out of it or something like that.
I was on mute. Talked about how a couple years ago, Cowie was on a similar episode of Food Fight, and we'll put a link in the show notes. I recommend listening to it. It was a lot of fun. And I'm curious, Cowie, what's changed? You've been at Etsy. You were newbie to Etsy at the time, and now you're the elder statesman, right? So what's
by elder statesman, I've been at Etsy 2.5 years, so it's not exactly like I'm a seasoned pensioner or anything. I think for me personally, I mean, I had been at Etsy probably only a couple of months at the time I did the Food Fight show. I think one of the biggest changes has been the company as a whole has pretty much doubled in size since then. Back just after I joined, the company was somewhere around 250, 300 people, and we're now close to 500. And the engineering team has doubled in size, and correspondingly the amount of infrastructure we have has gone up massively as well. So it was kind of interesting for me seeing how, because when I started, I was obviously still quite cynical in things, and I was thinking, Etsy has all this nice culture and stuff, but surely it's not going to last. As the company gets bigger, there are going to be procedures and compliance and all this stuff that's basically going to suck the joy out of the job. So it's been quite interesting for me seeing how that wasn't the case, and how as the companies got bigger, there have been challenges. For example, I mean the part I've been most involved with is our Chef workflow. We've had to evolve certain things, and we've had to adapt because as the company gets bigger, different challenges arise. But the interesting thing for me has been that how with that kind of culture, Oswald was talking about misunderstandings being easily fixable, and this kind of continuous delivery and communication and trusting has been how we've come up with these challenges. People have sat down and been like, okay, this needs fixed. So one example that particularly relates to me was Knife Spark, one of the tools I wrote. We use for all of our Chef stuff. That's our kind of Chef workflow tool. And a while ago, probably about 6-7 months ago now, we were sat in the ops meeting, and it turned out the way we were using Spark kind of didn't completely work. Like as we got more Chef users, it was beginning to kind of slow people down slightly. Some of the hoops we were having to jump through, and it was an interesting experience for me, because whereas in a previous company I could see me like, no, you're attacking my process. This is change. I don't like change. It was being able to, I guess it was having gained the perspective that comes from working in that kind of culture, to be able to take on board what people were saying and be like, okay, I can see what you're saying. This does need change, and rather than being defensive, it's like, okay, let's look at how to change this and make this better. And I've seen that happen time and time again with different challenges that have cropped up as Etsy's got bigger, and that is largely the way it happens. If something comes up that needs change, then you go and speak to somebody, or the manager in charge of that bit of the company or whatever, and you just have a discussion and like talk about, well, this is what's happening. How can we make this better? Like, everybody seems genuinely interested in advancing the state of the art in kind of what we're trying to do. There's no sort of defensiveness or kind of empire building. Like, no, you can't touch this. This is mine. You're eroding my power, sort of thing. So it's been interesting seeing as the company has, basically doubled in size, how we've managed to keep that culture. That's not saying we've stayed the same. Like I said, there's been a lot of changes, but we've been able to kind of utilize that culture to move through all those changes and end up where we are today.
Do you think that this philosophy that we keep talking about, this openness, this collaboration, and like you said, this actually, giving a shit, is kind of inherent to the DNA of the company, like from the beginning? Was there some type of, and Allspot is probably a little more towards you because you've got more historical bent on this, like was that almost from day one, or was there an adjustment that kind of happened? And I'm thinking for people that are wanting to make this type of transition or transformation in their organization today.
It's a good question. So I'd say sort of piecemeal. I know a lot of people say, a lot of people have asked me, okay, well, how do I do this? I want to do some of that stuff. How do I do that at my company? And usually what I say is, I don't know. I was in charge, so I don't know how somebody. I haven't been in a position where I didn't have the requisite authority to sort of make those changes, or at least it's been a very long time since that was the case. Actually, 10 years ago, that was the last time that I wasn't in a position of authority that could make material or at least large-scale changes in practices. Having said that, having learning reviews or after-action reports, or at least I think what we generally refer to as postmortems, that was something that we introduced, that I introduced here, and the requirement was that it needed to be filled with diverse perspectives. And sort of the tenets of what are now known as blameless postmortems required having diverse perspectives in the room. It's essentially a debriefing, and that helped. It helped a lot because then people from all over the organization would be able to sort of give their own narrative and then add it to others' perspective, not just in a technical realm, but finance and legal and customer support and fraud detection and design, all of those types of groups. So that made for a decent place for people to try to at least attempt to understand other people's perspectives. The other thing that is just very, very, it's sometimes easy for me to completely forget, is when developers deploy their own code, there's a bunch of things that can happen. It means that development cares much more about how their code is running in production, and then they are challenged by themselves to come up with answers to questions that they may not know. So those 50 or 60 times a day, or however many times a day we deploy, I'm not sure. I used to say that we're not so secretly turning software developers who come work at Etsy into ops people. we don't even. I don't even know. I don't know how many times we've deployed, because I haven't been even when I was on call and was working on tickets when I first got here. You guys don't know how many times today.
No. There's a dashboard right in front
There's a
of us.
dashboard. We can find out, but it's because ops is too busy. So many people have said to me, "Well, if developers deploy code, then what do operations do?" Like, are you joking? If operations isn't tasked with shepherding or chaperoning or releasing or anything like that, there's an immense amount of proactive work. I don't know. So I think that when that happens, you get developers having that. It's almost sort of like, not forced empathy, but they don't have to simulate. They are taking the perspective of an operations engineer, and I think that's hugely motivating, and it brings a huge amount of creative problem solving to the table that wouldn't ordinarily have happened if operations were in the critical path of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it does, and actually it was funny that you mentioned that when you said if ops isn't deploying code, what the hell are they doing? And when I was running tech ops at another e-commerce site, that was exactly what came up when we were talking about a lot of automation. Is the sysadmins on my team said, "Well, wait a minute, if this is all automated, then what are we going to do?" And I said, "We're going to do cool stuff rather than copy files around all the time." I mean, there's all these things that, like you said, you never get around to because you're doing all the stuff that either developers could be doing or even better, robots could be doing.
Yeah.
So,
And from my perspective as a developer, that's absolutely, if there's an ops team able to think for me, then I have no motivation to try and solve that problem. But if I'm included as part of that process, then it is my responsibility. I have to take that challenge on.
Yeah, and that's one cool thing we also do here is that we have what we call designated ops people for different teams. So, like, if you can be assigned to, like, I don't know, somewhere in the homepage with the homepage team. So the philosophy there is pretty much to help them out if they have anything like ops related questions, anything with setting up new Nagios alert checks or stuff like that, or graphs. But the main idea is actually to show them how to do this stuff so they can actually bring that to their team. So they enable them to actually if you want to do like Nagios checks, send metrics to Graphite and start graphing stuff, like we'll show you, we're not trying to hold anything, let us show you so you can actually do it, and actually we'll be there to help you out too.
One of the more interesting examples of just what David was talking about there is in our on-call rotation. We actually have a member of our DevTools team who is by occupation a developer. He's not technically part of the operations team. He was sufficiently interested in that side of operations that he requested to be in the on-call rotation, and has been, I think, for the last year.
Yeah. Yep.
Somebody asked to be on call. Wow.
Yeah.
You guys are doing something.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking.
So, so Matt wrote this question, so I don't know if I would have used the term mud pies, but what mud pies did you guys make that might help other organizations learn? So, what were your missteps that you guys became aware of that you solved? John, beginning of the episode, you mentioned, there are these you guys have been solving these little easy problems. Could you maybe touch on a couple of what those problems were?
So I guess one we've been focusing quite a lot recently. One of our other relatively kind of newer members of the team, Ryan France, his middle name has become Context. Ryan Context France, and his whole thing, like what's got him really excited at the moment, is taking our Nagios alerts and adding context to them. So we get, we still get paged when things happen. We put a fair amount of effort into trying to make sure that when we get paged, it's for something we actually need to deal with. So that was kind of step one of the process. Step two, what Ryan's been working on really, really hard, is when you get that page, we've all probably seen Nagios pages that just tell you, oh, disk space on the server is broken, and you get that big long line of meaningless disk stats. What Ryan's basically been working on is so when you get that alert, it will say, okay, disk space on web 200 is warning. Then it will give you like a kind of ribbon graph of all the partitions, and you can see which ones fill up. Then it will give you the ganglia graph of disk space on that box, so you can see if it just tipped over the threshold or if it's massively gone up, really, really quickly. And then it will give you like a sensible breakdown at the end of exactly how far over the threshold it is and where the threshold was, like what % was the threshold, and things like that. So so when you wake up, you can 4 in the morning you just got paged, you can just look at that email and you can see, oh hey, it gives you the information you need to be able to make the decision on what you have to do next, rather than having to wake up, get to your laptop, turn it on, log on to the VPN, log on to Nagios, then try and figure out what you're supposed to do. Because it might be the case that you can just act the alert by email. If it's just tipped over the threshold, you can act the alert by email and fix it in the morning. If you have to get out of bed and go to your computer to figure out that first, it just makes the experience much more sucky. So it's things like that. Like it's actively in our interest to do this stuff, but it's only by spending time on it we're actually able to solve this problem. It's not going to disappear by itself. So that's I would say in terms of quality of life, certainly that's been one of the biggest improvements that we've been able to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think another one that probably we kind of are spoiled on and we overlooked a lot is our host building process. It's so automated that in my last company we used to spend so much time trying to build multiple hosts. Like we have so many automated tools. We have pretty much a host building stack. Pretty much we can bring up a server in a matter of minutes, 5 minutes or so. I mean, it's little stuff like that where, hey, we're thinking of getting a new data center. All right, we don't have to worry about building like 100 servers. We'll just run a few commands and they'll start building up like that. So that's another big one I think that we kind of solve. I mean, it's kind of we overlook it a lot because it's so simple for us, but I mean it's very time consuming if you have to do like all the manual step of like doing the RAID configuration, then actually pixie booting the server and then configure. We have it right down to like I think I want to say like 5 to 10 minutes per server, so it's pretty lucky to have that.
And that's talking bare metal too, right? You're like, hey, great, you guys in the cloud, you can spin your VMs up in 15 minutes, whatever. We got hardware going too, so that's huge. Yeah. So I guess we're coming up towards our tail end here. I want to give a chance for everybody to, before we move into our checkouts, if there's some thoughts that you would have about what maybe the thing that you've learned the most from being part of this team at Etsy, that if you were to go and do this somewhere else or even not, just what have you learned? What's like the thing that sticks out the most?
I guess I can go first. I think honestly, it's what I've learned the most here is that I always had the philosophy, always learn something new, and then here it's like it's okay if you don't know, and you don't know everything. I mean, there's so many resources around you, so always have that drive and that hunger to learn, and and you can you can run your skill set by just touching new technologies and working on new things you probably haven't done before. So just that right there, I think it's that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I can say what I've learned from here is the value and I guess the importance of just asking questions. Everyone here has been more than accessible and willing to help, and to David's point, that'll just accelerate your skill set and ability to learn more.
Allspot, what have you learned?
I've learned that every time that I think that some sort of size barrier exists, I'm always proven wrong. Quite often you'll hear, oh well, we can't do that because the company's too big, or this will work now but it won't work later. Bullshit. That's the one thing over and over and over that I continue to. Things fail at a certain size because you expect them to, and aren't putting in enough effort to do the work to make them not break down. That's my pithy learning that I'll give you.
Cowie?
I would say probably the standout thing for me I've learned since I've been here is quite how much you can get done, and the kind of the things you can do when the consequence for failure is learning more stuff.
Oh, nice.
That's my even pithier one.
Awesome. Well, let's move into our checkouts. So, as this is the part of the show when everybody throws out something interesting that they would recommend to the audience to check out, hence the name. And I am going to rapid fire put everybody on the spot. So just wait till I call your name. So, Cowie, what do you got for us?
So I've been, one of my frequent bugbears over the last year has been chefing stuff on Macs, which is a horrible experience, since Apple seemed determined to make it hard to do anything without clicking buttons. So my mentions this week are two chef cookbooks. One is the DMG cookbook, which is maintained by Chef, which basically has a whole bunch of resources for things like unpacking a DMG and installing a PKG file inside it, and just all the stuff you would want to do with packages on Macs. And the second one I want to call out is Fletcher Nichols' RBN cookbook, which has single-handedly saved my somewhat long hair, which I'm quite pleased to have kept, which I did not have to tear out by trying to set up multiple Ruby environments on Macs via Chef in an automated fashion.
Awesome. David?
Actually, I just recently became a fan of pushover.net. It's this utility you can use to do push notifications to your phone, different applications. And I run a terminal client for IRC, and I'm getting all my, like, anytime someone messages me on IRC, I get a push notification on my phone, and you can set it up to go to like emails and other applications. You can do a lot of cool things. You can the API is very accessible. You can do a lot of things. So pushover.net, it's a great utility that you can use, and it works for Android, iOS. They even have a desktop application, which is, I think it's only like $4.99. And it's pretty cool. You can do a lot of things with that.
Cool. Pete?
I'm going to switch gears here and go with libations. Whiskey, Buffalo Trace.
Yes.
Yes.
It's a favorite here amongst
Yes.
you. So if you haven't had it, try it.
And Mr. Allspa?
I just recently re-watched a presentation by a very smart guy named Lloyd Taylor, and it was the name of the talk is called "Hacking Your Organization." It was in a 2011. Pretty sure it's 2011 QConf in San Francisco, and the QConf site has the entire video and slides, and so yeah, it's very well worth the 45 minutes or so to watch, especially for anybody who's interested in the stuff we've been talking about today.
Cool. I'll hunt that down. I'll hunt down that link and we'll put it in the show notes. Trevor.
All right. So I just found a site the other day called Shortcut Foo, and I totally suck at Vim, and I don't want to totally suck at Vim. And so this site actually, it doesn't just do Vim, it does other applications as well, but Vim is one of them, and it teaches you the shortcuts of getting around different IDEs and other environments. So I'm going to teach myself how to get around Vim with this tool. And secondly, I finally sat down and watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I was very happy to have done so. It tied in really well with the Dark World and with Winter Soldier.
This is true.
Matt, you want to
Yeah.
take us home?
I will. So mine actually, so Trevor, once you actually learn all the Vim shortcuts, you can take advantage of my checkout, which is a Google Chrome extension called Vimium, which gives you keyboard shortcuts for navigating and controlling Chrome using Vim shortcuts. It's amazing. And it's at vimium.github.io, and we'll put in a link. The other thing that I just heard about this morning is there's a Kickstarter for a card game called Release. And so it's a card game about software release. And it looks absolutely hilarious and intriguing and interesting. They have specialty cards for Patrick Dubois and Jez Humble and a bunch of other people they aren't telling us about yet. So for all we know, Allspa might be in there, and he just is keeping it quiet. I don't know. So,
I don't know anything.
So I also want to make sure everybody knows or remembers we do have an email newsletter. It's at arresteddevops.com/bananastand. And it's the best way to find out about upcoming podcast episodes and cool news with DevOps. We promise we won't send you something more than once a week, and we never, ever, ever distribute that email address to anybody else. And you can take our survey at arresteddevops.com/survey for a chance to win an Amazon gift card. Now, only listeners to the podcast can enter, so don't tell anybody that secret link I just told you. And if you are listening to this later, the contest will end on June 15th, 2014, so don't bother trying to do it like a year from now. Super duper huge thanks to our amazing panel for joining us today. Thank you to John Cowie and David Yurkowitz, Pete Belisano, and John Allspa. This was super interesting, and I hope that a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of it. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. Absolutely. And if you're new to us, find us at arresteddevops.com. We're at arresteddevops on Twitter. I am Matt. I'm at Matt Stratton.
And I'm Trevor at Trevor G. Hess on Twitter.
We are Arrested DevOps, and remember,
there's always DevOps in the banana stand.